Welcome, everybody, to the Tilted Lawyer podcast. This Saturday morning, as you were hearing this episode, we're going to be discussing Scott Peterson and whether or not his new attempt to get him out of jail, or at least get him a new trial, is going to succeed. You're going to want to stick around for this one. We're going to be doing a deep dive over the initial timeline about when all of this went down back in 2003, his many failed attempts to get himself at least a new trial, and this latest one, the probability of it actually coming to fruition. Let's see where he stands. Stick around. It's going to be a good one. Whatever you might be going through and wherever you might be, this is Omar Serrato with the Tilted Lawyer podcast. I'm here to take your mind off of things. Yes, I'm an attorney. No, I'm not giving you legal advice. We're going to sit and talk like people, as these are the candid thoughts of one practicing attorney, and it's after hours. So have a seat. Feel free to have a drink and join me. Let's get started. Hey, Liana, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, I guess.
You're here, even if remotely.
It's been a morning.
It's been one crazy morning. But here we are. So Scott Peterson, this happened back in 2002, 2003. What do you remember about this case when it all came about?
Well, at that time, social media wasn't a thing. I remember that my mom used to be subscribed to the Inquirer,
Yeah.
to the Inquirer magazine, and she was obsessed with getting the magazine to see what was going on with that case. And I remember like reading, just sitting and reading about it, and it was like scandalous. And I
Well,
mean,
back then, I mean, you're talking about 22 years ago.
yeah.
Dominic was not even born, or was he? He was born, but he was like a toddler. And I was 22 years old, just turned 22, and I was still an undergrad. And it was around Christmas Eve of 2002 where Lacey Peterson, it was like this perfect made-for-TV event where you had Scott Peterson, like the movie star, good looks, his wife with the movie star, good looks, and she goes missing. She's pregnant by like 7 or 8 months. She's about to have this child, and then this whole story breaks. It was Christmas Eve. She's reported missing from the Petersons' home in Modesto, California. And if you remember how that all came about, Scott's story was always that, oh, so that day I was going to go golf. And then that changed to, well, I'm not going to go play golf. I'm going to go fishing off the marina. And then he takes this 14-foot fishing boat. Consequently, Lacey was found washed ashore in that marina, maybe yards away from where they found Connor, the unborn child. And the way that they found her body, if you recall, is that she was weighted down with 5 makeshift concrete blocks that were attached to all of her limbs, her head, both of her arms, both of her legs. And so she sunk to the bottom of the marina. She sat underwater for a period of about 3 to 6 months. It was the estimates from the autopsy reports. And when they discovered her, they didn't discover her intact. It was basically her torso. They found young Connor with his umbilical cord still attached. And everything, pointed to, well, all right, so Scott's story is he's going to go fishing on the marina, but before that, he's going to go play golf. And then he had a mistress, Frye, and we just covered the whole Christopher Watts case. And, the parallels between that case and this one are striking. And they affect necessarily the other, because on the one hand, you have a guy that is about to give birth to a child that he clearly doesn't want. He was a young guy at the time. He had been married for 5 years at that point. I think that Lacey was only like maybe 23 or 24. Yeah, and I know people are going to correct me on the age, but she was young. They'd been married for 5 years. He had been having an affair with multiple women. It didn't really come out. If this had happened today, like for example, if this was like a Christopher Watts situation where they had social media and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure that all of his many affairs would have been greatly detailed. But the lead detective on this case had said that, yeah, we learned about a couple of different affairs that he was having. It wasn't just Amber Frye. Amber Frye was this single lady who was a massage therapist, and she was very much of the opinion that Scott was a single man. Had no idea that he was married. Actually, I recall vaguely that she had said that she thought that Scott was a widower, meaning that
Because he told
Lacey was
her
already gone.
that, yeah, he told her something around those lines, or that it could be interpreted as that she was not around or she was no longer living.
Well, she wasn't part of the picture. This wasn't like a Christopher Watts situation where Kessinger was well aware that not only was he married, but, had a child on the way with a couple of other kids and all of those things. So, and she was young, and they had gone to they'd been seen out in public by multiple people. Matter of fact, he had become acquaintances with her circle of friends to the point where one of her friends was a detective in the case. And although Amber Frye was not really one that watched a lot of TV, and back then, if you weren't really watching TV, you didn't exactly get it on your cell phone because social media wasn't really a thing back then. And so she learned from her detective, hey, they've been talking about this guy. He looks a lot like Scott. You might want to check that out. And then she found out about it and then goes to detectives and basically was like, hey, you know what? I know some things, and you guys might want to know what I have to say. And she had made a couple of attempts to the detectives to try to get information to them. The first time she made a call, she was talking to some dispatcher, and they basically took down her intake, her information, and she got frustrated and hung up on them. She called back a second time, I think it was like the next day or two after, and actually spoke with an actual detective on the case, and they went down there and got all that she had to offer. And then they set up these pretextual phone calls between her and Scott. And those are the famous ones that you've heard where he's like, oh, it's just so beautiful over here in France. I'm at the Eiffel Tower and there's fireworks and the crowds are amazing, as he's sitting there present at his wife Lacey's vigil. And, so there was a lot going on back then. January 24th of 2003, if we're revisiting the timeline, Amber Frye is when she came forward and she gives a police news conference. Do you remember Gloria Allred?
Probably not by name.
She was an attorney that, just kind of got her hooks into Amber and was forced her to give this interview, which I don't know. If you're an attorney, she's basically now what, like her publicist, her agent? It was bizarre, but that's not as common nowadays. But back then, it was all the rage. Oh, I'm going to have this attorney as publicist. I'm going to give a press conference and talk about what I know. And then she disclosed that I met Scott back in November of. I thought that he was divorced. I thought that his wife was already gone. And she just basically tells her story and then proceeds to write a book and profit handsomely off of it. But there were marked parallels, if you remember, between her and Nicole Kessinger. If you recall, in the Watts case, Kessinger looked up Amber Frye and wanted to know everything about what she went through. She wanted to know how much money she made off of her book, how she was perceived in the press, all those kinds of things. But the differences were startling in that Amber was much younger than Nicole was at the time that everything went down. So you would think that she would not be as smart, would not be as sophisticated, would not handle it as well as somebody like Nicole, who was almost 30 years old at the time. But she went to the police. She forced her way into the police because it actually turned her down at the time, the first time. Then she's speaking with the cops, and she's basically wants them to know everything and anything and everything there was to know about the relationship and what she could do to help. And then she participates in the investigation into Scott, and ultimately her pretextual phone call was played in court and used as evidence and helped in securing the conviction against Scott initially back in 2004. But moving along, if you recall, back on April 18th, the California Attorney General Bill Lockyer, he confirms that that's when they found a body on April 13th on the shore of San Francisco Bay, that it was Connor. And there was another body found on April 14th, the very next day. They presumed that to be Lacey, and they later confirmed that that was Lacey. And at that time, Scott Peterson was arrested in San Diego as he was probably fleeing to the southern border, San Ysidro. I was just there, as a matter of fact, to try to get away. And if you recall the pictures, the photographs, Dominic, I'm sure, is going to be throwing up a graphic here, but he had like this bleached blonde hair, like almost white, like that would have been so of the times. The bleached blonde look. And he was a brown-haired man, dark-haired man. And he gave a couple of different reasons as to why that was. The first reason was I was just trying to stay more anonymous because the media has been trying to get their hooks into him for quite some time. And, you know, he could have just stuck with that and it would have been fine. But then he says, well, I actually went in the swimming pool. There was too much chlorine in it and it bleached my hair unwittingly. So
Doesn't happen.
I was going to ask you, like, how often has that happened to you where you got in a swimming pool and you came out with like bleached blonde hair?
Never. It's another type of deletion. If he were a woman, he would know that doesn't happen.
Well, your natural hair color is what? Black? Brown?
No, it's what they call ash, light brown, or ash, dark blonde. I don't know. It's this color here.
Oh, so your hair's not dyed.
My hair is dyed, but it's dyed like from like here to the bottom. So it's
Oh, okay. So closer to the roots. It's like what your natural
yeah,
hair
it's
color
like if you see here, there's line like right here. So this is my natural color,
is.
and
Oh.
further down it's a little bit lighter to make
So
it.
when you were a teenager and you didn't have the money to dye your own hair like that, did you ever hear about the myth that you could jump in the swimming pool and just get it done for free?
No, I
By
mean that means
method
that
of
if right now
chlorine?
I wanted it blonder, I can just go into the pool and just sunk my head in there and be like super blonde like Lady Gaga. No, that
Like
doesn't
Lady Gaga.
happen.
Well, there was no reason for him to say that is the point. Like I would have bought the first explanation that,
Yes.
hey, I've been hounded by Diane Sawyer, by A Current Affair, I think was the thing back then. Dan Rather wants to talk to me. Dateline NBC. Could I just get look, I'm trying to find my wife who's gone missing. And so I grew a goatee and bleached my hair because I don't want to be recognized as Scott Peterson. And it was like, okay, well, that, it's hard to be famous, especially when it's the first time. And so that would have made sense. But then he goes with the bleach blonde thing because of the swim pool. And then it's like, okay, this guy's just stupid.
And then the other things that he had with him.
$15,000 in cash.
Mm-hmm.
His brother's ID. Yep, his brother's ID. I've never had any reason to have anybody else's ID other than my children's passports as we crossed the border this past weekend. So, yeah, obviously he was making a break for it to San Diego. Not only that, leading up to the murders, there was a lot of inconsistencies in his behavior as opposed to being a grieving man who had legitimately lost his wife without any regard for where she might have been. He was flirting with a 22-year-old babysitter. Do you remember that? There was this lady, and I might be mistaken her age, but I want to say that she was 22 years old. And his sister, Scott's half-sister, came out and said that he was like hitting on the babysitter and giving her like these, what he would call flirtinis, which is a martini with like, he put peach schnapps in it. It sounds disgusting, but maybe
it does.
it's something that you would drink. I don't know.
No. No.
Anything with peach, I'm all the way out.
No, that's too sweet.
Yeah, but he was trying to give mixed drinks to the babysitter. And, he would speak about Lacey in the past tense. At her vigil, he was on the phone with Amber trying to convince her that he was under the Eiffel Tower. It's super cringe when you hear the phone call. Dominic will find the clip and insert it here, I'm sure. But he's like,
hey.
Yes.
Okay, there you go. I'm talking.
Okay, I'm like, stay still or something.
I know. I got to make it work.
How was your New Year's?
What's that?
How was your New Year's?
It's good. I'm just, everyone's in the bar now, so I came out of the alley. Quiet alley. Is that nice?
Yeah, it is. I can hear you very good.
It's pretty awesome. Fireworks and everything for the Eiffel Tower. Some people all playing American rock songs.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty funny.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you guys decided to go out. Who?
Oh, definitely.
I can never remember your friend's name. I know Jeff, but you always say, from Swan
Koala. And then we have Pasquale, a friend of ours from Bangkok.
Uh-huh. Oh, he's there too?
Pasquale, yeah.
Good.
Hi.
He's like, oh, Amber, it's so beautiful over here. I'm under the Eiffel Tower. I wish you were here. The crowds are great. And it was just the most, ugh. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if he listened, went back and listened to any of his interviews that he gave with, for example, Diane Sawyer. But what is it with people that are suspected of crimes, speaking to the media, for one, but doing it in this vocal Frye voice? And it's like, oh, I don't know where Lacey is. And it drives me so nuts. It's so cringe. It's like nails on a chalkboard. I hate it so bad. Nicole, Chris, this effing guy, Scott Peterson, they all do it. And it's just, you got to speak from your guts, man. It's got to come from your guts. I tell you that all the time because people tell me all about how you never speak into the microphone properly. And I have to say, well, she's got, a small voice and you have to get her really riled up. And so, but no, the vocal Frye, to me, I mean, it's probably not an indicator of guilt, but it just seems to be a common theme with all of these suspected killers.
Because if it was his natural voice, like if he always talked like that, okay. But then you compare his voice on the interviews with his voice on the phone calls.
Yeah.
Very different. You could tell that he was putting on a show for the interviews.
Well, he is, I don't know if he's a sociopath or not. I don't know if he's a psychopath, but one of the things he definitely is a manipulator. And he had the ability to draw you in and project an image that would persuade you to think one way or another. And he did that with Amber Frye. He did it with a lot of young girls. And he tried to do it with the cops, but they weren't buying his bullshit. He tried to do it with his in-laws. They weren't buying it because his story wasn't making sense. And if you look at him on TV and on camera, I mean, he has a very disarming personality. Like, he's a kind of guy that you would see and he doesn't look particularly dangerous. Like, for example, there's a stark difference between Christopher Watts and this guy. Christopher Watts was kind of a dork.
Yes.
This guy could have been a movie star if he wanted to. And he had the charisma to pull it off. And he was good in the camera, and he was good in a crowd, and he had the ability to, when you were disarmed, lead you in any direction. Such as a Ted Bundy, And by the way, he could have been like Ted Bundy's child. I think Bundy died like in the 80s, didn't he? And so, continuing on our timeline. So he's arrested April 18th. On April 21st, at his arraignment, Peterson's charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation and special circumstances. Of course, he pleads not guilty. He's represented by the world-famous Mark Geragos. And if you're unfamiliar with Geragos, when it comes to trial attorneys, he's probably in the top 5 world-renowned trial attorneys in the world, especially back then, because back then he was really representing some high-profile people, not just this Peterson character, but I forget there was a couple of others. But he was really big in terms of trial attorneys go. Think Johnny Cochran, those types. He was among those types, the LA elites of trial attorneys. And that's the thing with the Peterson family. They had a lot of money. And so they were able to afford this superstar team of attorneys. So Geragos comes in on May 2nd, after his arraignment. On June 12th, there's a gag order in place on participants saying that the restrictions are necessary to preserve Peterson's right to a fair trial amid massive publicity. He managed, I think he got the venue switched around from where they were to someplace else. I forget.
Yes, it San Mateo or San something.
Yeah, I forgot exactly where it was. On September 26th, Lacey's family filed a civil lawsuit against Peterson, preventing him from receiving money for selling his story. On December 19th, Lacey's mom, Sharon Rocha, sued Peterson for over $5 million for the deaths of her daughter and unborn grandson. And the executor of Lacey's estate, Rocha, filed 2 separate lawsuits, wrongful death action and a survival action. I don't know how much money she's recovered from those judgments. I can't imagine it's been much.
I think she dismissed the wrongful death suits.
Did
And I
she?
know, yeah, sometime later in the timeline, I know she did. And also, I know she did receive the money from the insurance that Scott had taken out on Lacey. I think it was just 150,000.
Okay. Okay. Hey, so you were right. They did move the trial to San Mateo County. They began the trial on March 4th. On June 1st, jury selection begins on March 4th. The trial begins on June 1st. On June 21st, Judge DeLucci tells jurors that they must make sure that their actions in and around the courtroom are not misconstrued. The warning came after juror number 5 spoke to Lacey's brother Brent Rocha at a courthouse security checkpoint on June 18th, and that was the subject of a later appeal that was eventually denied. But it may have spared Peterson of the death penalty, and we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yes.
On August 10th, Amber testified that Peterson told her that he was a widower and lied about where he lived and where he traveled. Jurors heard recordings of Peterson and Frye's conversation made by police after she discovered the truth. And then on November 3rd, the jury deliberations begin. On November 12th, Peterson is found guilty of first-degree murder for Lacey's death and second-degree murder. On December 13th of 2004, it was recommended that Peterson be sentenced to death. And then the judge on March 16th follows the recommendations and sentences him to death. I remember exactly where I was when the verdict came back. I was working in El Monte, California. I was like, I want to say that I was like in the drive-through or parking lot of In-N-Out somewhere on my lunch break. And I was listening to the jury being read live on KFI, Los Angeles.
Oh.
It's a core memory that I have. And I just remember thinking, man, that effing guy, I hope he fries. And it's, one of the ways that I associate with this case. So October 21st, a judge ruled that proceeds from a life insurance policy that Peterson took out on Lacey was going to go to Lacey's mother. And then on 2009, they dropped the wrongful death lawsuit against Peterson, as you had mentioned. On March 19th of 2019, 10 years later, Governor Gavin Newsom, in all of his wisdom, signs an executive order issuing a moratorium on executions of death row inmates in California prisons, which included Scott Peterson. And then the appeal in 2020. So in that appeal, Peterson was asking for a few different things. Number one, he wanted a new trial. Number two, he wanted a reinvestigation into a burglary scene that had taken place across the street from the Peterson residence. And number three, he wanted the death penalty thrown out because of deficiencies that had happened during jury selection. On December 8th, I just lost my place. Let me pull up my notes again. So he files that appeal. And I did it again. And then on October 14th, the California Supreme Court ordered the San Mateo County Superior Court to re-examine Peterson's murder convictions because of a juror did not disclose involvement in other legal proceedings, including but not limited to being the victim of a crime. And on December 8th, Peterson was resentenced to life without the possibility of parole by Judge Ann Christine Masulo, and we will get to all of the legal reasons why that is. So, October 22, Peterson's moved from death row at San Quentin near San Francisco to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. And in April, Peterson's attorney filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in which they allege violations of state and federal constitutional rights and state statutory rights, including a claim of actual innocence that is supported by newly discovered innocence. And that led to this year, January of 24, the Los Angeles Innocence Project, saying that it has begun representing Peterson. It's a nonprofit organization that's separate from the New York Innocence Project, the very famous organization that's been around for years. They filed a motion in March. There was a hearing on March 12th asking for the ability to test for DNA evidence of an abandoned van that was set on fire, where the police chief had said that there was a auburn or a maroon stain on the floorboard of the carpet that looked a lot like blood. They wanted to do DNA testing on all of that. And then that's where we are. So, interestingly, the lead investigator in this case has done multiple interviews as to what his opinion is of whether or not he got the conviction of Scott Peterson correct. And what he says over and over and over again is that this was a purely circumstantial case. Yes, you're not going to get any video evidence. Back then in 2002, Ring doorbell cameras were not a thing. And if you had anything like that, it was extremely cost prohibitive for most people to have something like that. Surveillance cameras and those kinds of things. What they had were witnesses that testified to a number of different things. So one of the proponents of those that suggest that Scott Peterson may not be guilty is that there were witnesses that said that the day that Lacey disappeared, Christmas Eve of 2003, they saw a pregnant woman walking a dog. There was a burglary that happened across the street from the Peterson residence. A couple of people that were caught and convicted of the burglary of that residence. And there were suggestions that she couldn't have been taken by Scott. He was already gone that morning. He went fishing. And Lacey was seen after, during the day on Christmas Eve, walking her dog out in public. There was this burglary that happened across the street. Is it possible that the perpetrators of that burglary might have been the actual people that committed the murder, that abducted a pregnant woman because she was a witness to something nefarious that they didn't want to be found or caught doing, and they got rid of the witness? Maybe that's a possibility. Now, the whole theory behind that van is that it was set on fire for one. Mm-hmm. It was found in some abandoned area. And then there was this blood stain. And what the Innocence Project essentially wants to do is they want to test that blood stain to see if it contains the DNA. And the detective spoke out on this and said, hey, if they want to test that DNA, go for it. We welcome it. But then he says it like this, like, hey, look, if there's evidence out there that points to Scott Peterson's innocence, then I'm all for it. If you didn't really do this and we got this wrong, fine. It's a circumstantial case and we get it. I think that having examined those leads prior in our initial investigation, I think that we got it right. So here's the thing about those investigators, or the burglars. So they were caught and apprehended fairly quickly after everything happened. So they were there on Christmas Day. When everybody was wondering what was going on with Lacey, the media was going in and out of that residence. And so they could not really go out through the front and carry stolen property. And so they were using the back entrance to go to and from. All of the items that were found in their possession, none of them belonged to Lacey or anybody in the Peterson residence. It was all from that house. They took lie detector tests because they questioned them about whether or not they had any involvement with Lacey. And it went something like this. Hey, we might have stole this stuff, but we had nothing to do with Lacey. I'll take a lie detector test on that. You could test me, whatever. I'll say whatever I got to say, because the detective had suggested they didn't want to go to prison with people thinking that they were responsible for the death of a pregnant lady that was 8 months pregnant. They don't really do very well in prison. And so they were vetted. They were investigated. Everything that they were in their possession had nothing to do with Lacey. It was extremely consequential or coincidental that it occurred on the day that she went missing, But as far as their involvement in anything, there's no physical evidence that points to their involvement whatsoever. What they did find was a strand of hair, a single strand of hair, of Lacey's hair, in that 14-foot fishing boat that Scott had just purchased, I don't know, a short time prior to that. I don't know how many times Lacey had ever been on that boat, if ever.
She didn't have to for her hair to be there.
Exactly. Because, I mean, it could have just been...
My husband's car is full of hair, of my hair, and
I was just going to say, I find my wife's hair all over the place, all the time. It's just a thing, you know. So that single strand of hair is not significant. It's one piece of circumstantial evidence that supports that Peterson might have been responsible. But you have to take that in conjunction with everything. And this was a purely circumstantial case. And a lot of people have wondered, and we've talked a lot about whether or not Nicole Kessinger has been involved in the murder of Christopher Watts. That's a purely circumstantial case. And there's many strands that point to her guilt, but there's just not enough to support reasonable or beyond a reasonable doubt to get a conviction, in my opinion, for them to further pursue anything with respect to her. But in this case, it wasn't just that. There was all of these other strands. If you get rid of the one hair that they found, there's still all of this other stuff. So he changed his story. He said, oh, I was going to go out golfing. Then he switches it. We're going to go out fishing on the marina. Single strand of hair on the boat. They find evidence in his place of concrete that he built these concrete anchors with.
Yes. That's one of those items that I was like, okay, say that he's innocent. We have an explanation for a lot of other of the evidence, but that's one of them that I'm like, how do you explain that? Like,
yeah, well, not only that, but the cover to his fishing boat was this really nice aluminum cover that probably cost a couple of $1,000s that you wouldn't just like drop off in a shed to like rot and get dirty. And where they found that aluminum cover was underneath a leaking bottle of gasoline with all of this rusted stuff in the back of his shed. And people have suggested, well, prosecutors have suggested that was because he was trying to get rid of the scent of Lacey, perhaps. But if you have a cover like that, you're not just going to toss it in a shed and have it leaking all over. Like, you're going to take care of it, or it's going to be on the boat, probably under a tarp with the boat. You're not going to just separate it like that. The way that they found it was very suspicious. There was a bit of video that Garagos wanted to introduce at the time. Here's what's very telling to me. So there was a video that Mark Garagos had put together. And I want to say that it was in one of these documentaries that came out on Netflix years ago that were pointing to the possibility that Scott might be innocent. And it had demonstrated that there's no way that a person on a 14-foot fishing boat, which is really not that big. It's like one of these tiny little boats. It's not a yacht.
yes,
for example.
exactly.
There's no way that he's going to get a 8-month pregnant woman tied to 5 concrete anchors over a boat without that boat capsizing. And then on the video, there is a person trying to replicate throwing out like a body bag, which would have been essentially Lacey, with those concrete weights. And every single time the boat would tip over. And he tried to get that in evidence. And the judge is like, I'm not putting that into evidence because the prosecution wasn't there. The detectives weren't there. Nobody could object to anything. And so if you have evidence like that, it's like, okay, fine. Let's go to the river. Let's all do it together. And that matter of fact, let's bring the jury. Let's see if this is going to work out. And so they didn't do that. However, when the judge dismissed that request, they just left it alone. My guess is because they were looking for a particular result. And if they did it a certain way, the boat wasn't going to capsize over. But the point was, like, they were trying to say is, How could he have possibly taken her into the marina, dropped her off with these weighted concrete blocks, and dropped her off in the ocean without the boat tipping over? And the prosecution's point would have been, well, there's a way. If you don't want your boat to sink, you would have done it this way. And so my guess is they probably tried it 5 different ways. 3 of the times the boat didn't sink, and a couple of times the boat did sink, and that's the one that the judge saw. So that was it. And then if you ask the burglars, which has been, Peterson's main war cry in all of this, that story really doesn't work out. And so now this last ditch effort is like this final appeal. And I don't know. What you don't have in this case is any definitive evidence. You're not going to have a confession. You're not going to have video. You're not going to have eyewitness testimony saying that, oh, I definitely saw Scott do what he did. But you have all of these circumstantial strings that attach guilt to him. The first jury found him guilty on a completely circumstantial case, and all of his appeals have been really weak in trying to get him a new trial. So let's talk about the 2020 appeal. So the 2020 appeal, it's a famous case now that I'm sure law students study when it comes to the Eighth Amendment. But this is essentially the case. The death sentence was reversed because the trial court erroneously dismissed 13 prospective jurors based on a written questionnaire expressing opposition to the death penalty, even though all 13 prospective jurors attested that their views would not prevent them from following the law. That was it. And the overview was this, because it's a really long case if you read it in its entirety. But in a capital murder case under Penal Code 187-189, the death sentence was reversed because the trial court erroneously dismissed 13 prospective jurors based on a written questionnaire response expressing opposition to the death penalty, even though they all attested that their views would not prevent them from following the law. So basically, in trial selection, they'll ask you this stuff. They'll say, do you think that you could fairly and objectively be a jury on this case, even though you might morally disagree with the outcome or the penalty phase of all of this? In this case, the death penalty. If they say, Your Honor, no, I can't, because I'm morally opposed, and there's no circumstance where I would ever rule in favor of the death penalty. If the judge were to dismiss in that scenario, then fine, good objection. But all of these jurors said, yeah, I'll follow the law, even though the law in California is basically discretionary. So I understand kind of the pros and cons of that argument, both sides of that argument, because on the one hand, if you're the judge, it's like, okay, well, if we're just completely ruling out the death penalty based on your moral conundrums, fine. I'm going to dismiss you there. But the law allows for them to have that position, which is kind of the issue with California. The jury could, for no other reason than their own discretion, decide that I'm not voting for the death penalty, no matter how bad the case is. And it's lawful for them to do that. And so it's kind of a stupid question to say that, but are you going to follow the law? Yes. And following the law would be to advance my moral compass in this case and decide that he doesn't deserve to die because of my religious background or because of my own moral conundrums or whatever. And so it's kind of a stupid ruling in that regard, but a technically correct one, because if they told you that they were going to follow the law and you still dismiss them, then you didn't have a good basis to dismiss them. In other words, somebody could jump on jury selection in voir dire and basically say that, hey, I am a stone cold racist, but I will still be objective in my observation of the case, and I will rule according to the evidence that's presented in front of me. That stated racist could lawfully sit on the jury, and as a matter of fact, according to this case, they could not lawfully be dismissed from the jury because they said that they were going to follow the law. And so on that really stupid technicality, they were able to reverse his death penalty sentence to one of life without parole. The outcome of that case was the court affirmed the judgment as to guilt, reversed the judgment as to the sentence of death, and remanded the matter for a new penalty determination. What do you think about all that, Ileana?
It's just crazy. I mean, that was one of my questions when it comes to the case. I had the opportunity to review a lot of things, but I didn't know what was the reason why
It was really dumb.
the death penalty was changed to life without parole. So now that I'm hearing it, it's like, okay, really, now we have to pretty much feed this guy for the rest of his life. But whatever.
Well, this is the law that came out as a result of that appeal in 2020. And for all of you, look, we're kind of nerding out right now because we're literally going into like the way case law gets written and at the state level. But several different legal principles were born out of this case. Number one, prospective jurors may be excused from jury service for cause based on a determination that bias or another substantial impairment disqualifies them from service. They'd always known that. And they say that in a capital case, prospective jurors are subject to excusal if they would be unable or unwilling to impose the death penalty, if they would be unable or unwilling to vote against death should the defendant be found guilty. But then they go on and say this: a sentence of death cannot be carried out if the jury that imposed or recommended it was chosen by excluding veneer members for cause simply because they voiced a general objection to the death penalty or expressed conscientious or religious scruples against its infliction. A criminal defendant has the right to an impartial jury drawn from a veneer that has not been tilted in favor of capital punishment by selective prosecutorial challenges for cause based solely on general opposition to the death penalty. However, trial courts may excuse a prospective juror for cause based on the juror's views of capital punishment if those views would prevent or substantially impair the performance of his duties as a juror in accordance with his instructions and his oath, which is fine. But the law in California is stupid because it's basically in your discretion.
Mm-hmm.
Based on this conviction and everything that you've seen in trial, would you recommend the death sentence in this case?
Based on the what we know about the case?
Yeah, and if their answer is no, they don't have to explain their reason.
Yes. I mean,
So when they say, I will follow the law,
yeah, I mean,
I will
as long
follow
as
the
you
law.
follow
I
the
will
law.
use my discretion to exercise my moral compass and say that this man does not deserve to die. It doesn't make a lot of sense because it's just arguing out of both ends, honestly. Also came out of that case, prospective jurors may not be disqualified from service simply because they object to the death penalty as a general matter. Not all who oppose the death penalty are subject to removal for cause in capital cases. Those who firmly believe that the death penalty is unjust may nevertheless serve as jurors in capital cases so long as they state clearly that they are willing to temporarily set aside their own beliefs in deference to the rule of law. Meaning, I swear, I really pinky promise that I will not impose my own sense of morality and my discretion in making a determination of whether or not Scott Peterson is worthy of the death penalty, which is 100% stupid and ridiculous because jurors are supposed to rely on their own common sense and judgment based on their own personal experiences to then say that they are not allowed or they're going to somehow be able to turn that off and making a determination at the sentencing phase is just utterly ridiculous. But that's the law as it stands in California. What do you think of that?
It just doesn't make sense. Like you said, that expectation that people are gonna be able to like turn on and off that switch, it just doesn't make sense to me. Like, yes, I say I don't believe in or I believe in the death penalty, to give you an example, and then during trial, I'm not gonna use that belief when I make my decision. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Yeah, I mean, we ask jurors to do that. Matter of fact, we tell jurors that, you know, you guys are the arbiters of guilt and innocence. It is your job to determine the facts based on your own personal judgment, based on your own personal experiences, because that's all we really have. I can't even shut off my moral compass, my personal beliefs, my personal experiences as an attorney. How would we expect a juror to do the same when they know nothing of the law on average, except what they've seen on TV for the most part? And they're coming into a situation where they know that they have very little experience. Most people, when they have zero experience on anything, rely very strictly on their own personal experiences. They have nothing to do with the situation because it's all they have. And they got to rely on something. And so
And it's like when us as attorneys, we decide that there's certain cases that we believe that we're not going to be able to represent the client just based on what they have done. And the state bar says, well, even though you're telling me that you're not going to be able to represent the person, I guess, how you're supposed to, you're still going to represent them, and I still expect you to go ahead and not be biased or I don't know. It just doesn't make sense, which reminds me that there was at some point, if I'm not mistaken, in Puerto Rico, something going on like that, where they were forcing attorneys to take on cases that they were not taking on, cases pro bono in areas that they were not familiar with.
competent, yeah.
Yes, and competent, and they expected you to represent them with competence, but at the same time, you couldn't just say no. So it was like this thing where you were gonna fail either way. Either you were gonna get somebody in trouble because you were not representing them with competence, and at the same time you could get an in re just because you didn't do it right, but you just couldn't say no. So you're pretty much that's the way that I see it. You're telling these people like you have to act a certain way, but at the same time, like, I don't know.
I just have to say this.
It goes in circles.
California law, when it comes to many things, is
Oh,
just
yeah.
100% ass backwards, nonsensical. It's ridiculous that we would have these distinctions, but the law basically opens up for interpretation, and so it's basically a worthless law. So you're telling me that, all right, I can have an objection morally to a death penalty, whatever, fine. But I'm also allowed to use my discretion. And I just have to promise to you that I'm not going to, I'm going to set aside my personal objectives to somehow come to a competent decision. And this person, this juror, could be a 19-year-old vegan, I don't want to say tree hugger. What would be the appropriate term? Environmentalist, whatever. Do you remember being in college and being like, oh, I'm going to save the world, I'm going to save everybody and all that kind of stuff? Wearing like the Che Guevara t-shirts and the bandana and carrying on the good. You know, lots of kids do that. And then they grow up and they figure it out. Yeah. And so you could have one of these people that are just going to affect change however they can. They get on a jury and, hey, we're just going to shut all that off because, you know, they're 19 years old and they said that they would. It's nonsensical, but that's the law in the state of California. And that is why Scott Peterson is not on death row as we speak. I apologize on behalf of California. But, you know, I mean, I can't even really say, I don't want to be the one to disagree with that. I will tell you this, that when I was in law school, I wrote a paper once on the 8th Amendment. I told you about this before. And the 8th Amendment based on cruel and unusual punishments. which is basically the death penalty amendment. And I argued for expansion of the death penalty. Hey, why limit it to murderers? Why not expand it to violent and child molesters? If you have it in your capacity to violently anybody or a child, then you should forfeit your ability to live amongst the rest of us. That was my argument. And then I remember I read it to my class, and then the professor was like, all right. And then I remember like he was questioning everybody on like answering, like there's this question and answer thing with the professors. And I remember I read mine, and I was so ready for him to like go question and answer on me because I'm going to defend my position. And then he just kind of moved right along. So
It's like, I agree, I guess.
I don't know if I should have been offended. I don't know if that was good or bad, but I aced it. So among the other elements of that appeal, they were arguing for a new trial, essentially saying that the trial was unfair. They outlined the prosecution's evidence that came out at trial, and this is what they said. I'm going to try my best to condense this. They say that Peterson and Lacey, they met in San Luis Obispo, where Lacey was attending college, and Peterson was working in a restaurant. They married in 97. They opened and ran a restaurant together in San Luis Obispo. In 2000, they moved to Modesto and bought a house. Lacey took a job as a substitute teacher, while Peterson ran a startup fertilizer company named Trade Corp USA out of a leased warehouse. Some years after the two were married, Lacey became pregnant. The baby, whom the couple had named Connor, was due in February of 2003. Connor would be 21 years old today if he was still with us, but he never got that chance. On December 23rd of 2002, Lacey went grocery shopping around midday. She also had a prenatal medical checkup. Oh, and by the way, Lacey was at that stage of pregnancy where she could barely move.
Oh, yeah.
And she had gotten medical advice from doctors saying, hey, you just don't need to be on your feet at all. And so these claims that people had found her like walking around pulling a Labrador retriever or whatever the dog was, was just preposterous. She was not walking down around the block. She was not mopping the floor. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like there was cleanup, and then Scott had made mention that, oh, Lacey was like mopping the floor and all this kind of stuff. She wasn't doing anything like that. She was very low energy, according to her doctor, according to her mom.
Pregnant, I was not mopping floors.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the dog around me because, I mean, and a golden retriever is a lot bigger than my dog. So, yeah, I mean.
My wife could not walk around the block. My little 6-pound poodle-ish, I don't know what kind of dog it is. It's a poodle mix of something. But she wasn't walking the dog around anywhere. You know?
No, I mean, just barely just walking from one room to another at 8 months, you're just like it takes out your breath and
yeah,
your feet get swollen. Like, no, I mean, I think the only time that I walked on purpose, it was because the weeks before I needed to give birth, it just, they recommend that so that the baby gets into position and all that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I was preventing any way I could to walk, especially a long walk that they suggested that she walk for like 45 minutes with the dog.
Well, I'll tell you what, the detectives were all over that theory of the case.
Yes.
And they found out that not just Lacey, there was 2 other pregnant women that from a far distance could have resembled Lacey, but also had those kinds of dogs that they talked about, and could have been the ones that one witness had seen walking the dogs. But from what they knew, Lacey was basically not moving around that well. Her balance was off. She wasn't pulling around a large dog, in excess of 30, 40 pounds, walking around the block to get her exercise. She was about to give birth in February, in a couple of months. And so for all of the reasons that you just said, there's no chance that was a thing. They found her with a couple of broken ribs. She wasn't complaining to anybody about broken ribs at the time leading up to her disappearance. And so their theory of the case is essentially that this is basically the detective's theory of the case, that Scott murdered her or strangled her inside of the house, that he laid on top of her, basically asphyxiated her. And the defense attorneys point to, well, there was not any excretions in the course of the murder that they would have found inside the house. She would have defecated on herself. She would have urinated on herself. She would have, there would have been other secretions. And the cops were like, yeah, that's not an absolute. That's not how that works. Every single time, sometimes it happens, not always, And so that wasn't significant. But yeah, then he removes her. And just like in the Watts case, witnesses saw Peterson backing up his truck inside of the garage in a way that they had never seen before. It's not a ring camera or anything because that wasn't a thing. But it's suspected that he loaded the body inside of the garage, took it to the warehouse, loaded her body into the boat at the warehouse so nobody would have seen him doing that, sailed onto the marina, and then did what he did that day, and then presumed life as normal.
When I heard about the Christopher Watts case, I always wondered, did he research? Because we know about Nicole, but did he research or had a lot of knowledge about the Scott Peterson case? Because the similarities are just to me.
Well, we know that Kessinger did,
Yes, Kessinger, yes, but we don't know. I believe that when she did that, it was before.
I don't think that Christopher was that smart.
Yeah, that's true.
And the only parallels to him would have been just circumstantially the family dynamic.
The family dynamic, the backing. But I don't know. It just reminds me so much of this case. It seems like he was imitating him.
Yes.
Of course, at a certain level, because of course there were the children and the oil tanks and all that. That's completely different. But.
Yeah, I don't think that Christopher was imitating this case. I don't. I just think that he was an idiot.
Oh, that too.
But I think that when Nicole was put in this position, then she 100%, she did the Google searches for Amber Frye. And those kind of speak for themselves.
What case, what state did it happen again?
Colorado.
Well, there's no water.
No, there's no water. There's oil tankers, of course. They have lakes. There is lakes around that area, small ponds, but not an ocean. It certainly was not the Pacific Ocean, I'll tell you that much. I'll tell you what, this case and the Christopher Watts case, if anything, a lot of people want to point to why Nicole Kessinger has not been implicated in these murders. And a lot of the reasons is because how Amber Frye acted versus how Nicole Kessinger acted is night and day.
Exactly.
And, I've spent a couple of episodes talking about why that is, but so I don't want to rehash it here just because of time. I've already been going for an hour. So let's get back into this timeline. So on December 23rd, Lacey went grocery shopping around midday. She had a prenatal checkup. In late afternoon, both Lacey and Scott went to a salon where Lacey's sister, Amy, worked. And Amy mentioned that she had ordered a gift basket for a family member that needed to be picked up the next day at around 3. Scott volunteered to get it for her as he said he's going to go be golfing nearby. Peterson also invited Amy to dinner, but she declined because she had prior plans. And that night, Lacey and her mother, Sharon, spoke on the phone and confirmed that Lacey and Scott would join Sharon and Sharon's longtime partner, Ron Gransky, for dinner the night following Christmas Eve. So at 10:18 the following morning, a neighbor, Karen Service, saw the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, wandering unaccompanied on the street wearing his leash. Peterson truck was gone. Lacey's car was still in the driveway. There was no signs of activity at the house. So Service put Mackenzie in the Petersons' backyard and closed the gate. And lost my place. That afternoon, Gransky tried to reach Lacey without success. Around 3:45, Amy received a call that her gift basket had not been picked up. She was unable to reach Peterson. Neighbors reported Peterson's truck still absent at 4:05, but back by 5:30. And around 5:15, Scott called Sharon and asked if Lacey was there. He described Lacey as missing. Sharon suggested he check with friends and neighbors. Peterson called Sharon back shortly afterwards and reported the people he had spoken to had not seen Lacey either. Sharon told Gransky to call the police, and officers soon met Peterson, Sharon, and Gransky at a nearby park. Neighbors and other relatives gathered at the park as well. Gransky spoke with Peterson and asked if he had gone golfing that day. Peterson said he had changed his mind about golfing and had gone fishing instead. Told at what time Peterson had gone, Gransky suggested it was an unusually late time to be fishing. Peterson walked off without responding. Peterson told a cousin of Sharon's and two neighbors that he had been golfing all day. He volunteered to Sandy, a friend of Sharon's, that he would not be surprised if the police found blood in his truck because he cut his hands all the time. And by the way, he had volunteered that information to Diane Sawyer in a interview that he had done on like late night television, saying, "Hey, I wouldn't surprise me if they found blood in my car because I work on farms all the time. And matter of fact, that day I had reached into my toolbox and I cut my hand, so there's definitely blood in my car." He had volunteered that. The detectives that were working this case basically said that, well, that's probably evidence of a guilty conscience, but it's also his attempt to try to explain it all away. So they were looking at him really quickly. Police inspected the Peterson home. There was no signs of forced entry. Nothing appeared missing, and Lacey's purse was still there. Peterson told officers he and Lacey had watched television that morning, and Lacey had planned to walk the dog and go grocery shopping. Peterson decided to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay. He went to his company warehouse where he stored a boat, drove to the Berkeley Marina, fished for 2 hours, and quit because the day was cold and rainy. He tried calling Lacey on the home phone and her cell phone, but did not reach her. Peterson got home around 4:30. He washed his clothes, ate some pizza, and then called Sharon to track down Lacey.
I am right now checking because I've been wondering how far is Modesto from the San Francisco Bay.
It's not that far. I want to say
It's not too far because
25 minutes?
I don't know about the time, but just looking at it in a map, I
Yeah.
can tell that it's far. I don't know. For some reason, I'm not from California, so
Yeah.
I get it is mixed up, and I don't know why I was thinking that Modesto was closer to the south border. I think it's because at some point they mentioned that Scott was in San Diego,
Yeah.
and I think that's what got me confused. So, because I was like, that's gonna be a long drive from San Diego area to San Francisco.
Oh, well, they were up the north already. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it wasn't that far. I mean, he tried to make a run for the border for sure, but that didn't work out. Officer Matthew Spurlock, he questioned Peterson about fishing. He asked him, "So what kind of bait did you use?" And then he wasn't able to, he said he couldn't remember. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of different varieties of bait, And the one that you
I don't know
chose,
much
it's not that
about
hard
fishing
to learn.
other than you usually go very, very, very early. And a lot of people like to go with company. I don't know. I've never been fishing, but
I've been fishing a couple times, and the bait that you use is like fish guts, like
Right.
chunks of anchovies. If you're using live bait, you can use anchovies.
worms.
That's like more for like lakes, like
Oh.
a freshwater
Oh, there's a
lakes.
difference. Oh God.
Yeah, but if you're going in the ocean, you usually use like a live bait, like you'll stick the hook through the head of like an anchovy or something, which will allow them to live. I know it's cruel. It sounds very cruel, but that's what they do. Dominic, you ever been fishing like that?
No.
Well,
What do you usually catch in?
edit that out. In the ocean?
Yes, because I mean in the lake I kind of know, but what do you usually catch in like the ocean, like kind of like the San Francisco Bay area? Like
Oh,
it's
you
very-
catch all kinds of stuff. Usually, you can catch tuna. You could catch halibut. You could catch. Well, I'm not like a big fishing expert either. I just know that. Imagine all of the. Yeah, if you go to like San Diego or down like to Rosarito, all the stuff that's the fresh fish on the menu, well, that's what you would catch.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of yellowtail, a lot of bluefin tuna, a lot of lobsters and things. I want to say salmon is a big one. Yeah, and I'm not a big fisher, man. I get seasick. I can't do all of that, and so, or I haven't in a long time. It's been years.
I just don't see the fun in it, but
It's
the
not.
whole part of getting up super early, and then okay, you get the fish. I feel bad for the fish. It's
I feel
because
bad for
you're
the fish.
killing it. Yes, and then the other option is just to let it go, but then you already hurt the fish by just.
You just impaled its whole mouth.
It doesn't make sense, but what's the fun in that? Oh yes, I caught you. I'm gonna let you go now. Like,
I mean, my one experience deep sea fishing was with my uncle Mark.
oh, deep sea. That is different because I have some friends that do that in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Deep sea fishing, that's like a sport.
Yeah, but it is and it isn't. It's like, I mean, okay, so we're in the ocean and then we're fishing and you get up like super early, 2 a.m. and you're out there out in the ocean, 3 a.m. and you go to wherever you're going to go. And, I got really seasick. So I went down under, and then I came back out and you're sitting there on a boat and you're waiting for fish and they have radar. And so they'll, look for a good spot on the radar and then you start fishing. And then you'll catch like these big, huge fish and they get them on the boat and then they're flopping around and you got to kill them right away. If you're going to keep it, you and so like the way that they'll do it is like they'll break their backs or they'll stomp on its head. But that's how they will do it.
But just going back to Scott, like what you're telling me, and you've been fishing just a couple of times, you kind of remember what you used. You kind of remember.
Well, what bait? I can remember what bait I used when I was on that deep sea boat. It was freaking anchovies. That was all it was.
I don't remember anything.
Yeah, and I remember going back fishing in the '80s on a lake. We used freaking worms. That's it.
Yeah.
Those are the two. And it's not that difficult to remember. So the fact that he couldn't remember what bait he had was telling. And I think that he didn't give them an answer because it would have said that, okay, well, how are you going to use worms if there's nowhere to buy worms? He just didn't know what he didn't know. And so he didn't want to give too much information, which is smart on his part. But yeah, they questioned him about that. So Peterson explained that he had taken them out so he could wash the clothes he had worn that day. Oh, that we're talking about, I skipped ahead. So Detective Alan Brochini gets on the stand. He was called to the Peterson home. He found wet towels on top of the washing machine. Peterson explained that he had taken them out so he could wash the clothes he had worn that day. And inside the washing machine were Peterson's jeans, shirt, a green pullover jacket. In the bedroom, officers observed a laundry hamper nearly full of clothes. And with consent, Detective Brochini examined Peterson's truck and saw large patio umbrellas and a tarp in the truck bed. Inside the truck cab, he found a fishing rod and a bag containing a package of unused fishing lures, and a receipt indicating the items had all been purchased on December 20th. Peterson handed him a Berkeley Marina parking receipt that indicated Peterson had entered around 12:54. On the back seat was a camouflage jacket, which, by the way, is really late to go fishing. Peterson said he had worn fishing that day. Brochini and Peterson then went to the Peterson warehouse. There, Brochini observed what he described as a homemade anchor made of concrete in Peterson's boat, but no long rope to attach it to. Which, if you're making an anchor, it doesn't really work unless you have a rope attached. So Peterson agrees to a further interview at the Modesto police station. Peterson repeated that Lacey had planned to walk the dog and go grocery shopping, which is nonsense. She's not walking a dog at 7 months pregnant. Peterson decided to go fishing because it was too cold to golf. If it's too cold to golf, I can't imagine it's much warmer to go fishing.
That's something that when I was watching the documentary about this case, I was like, it doesn't make sense. Like if you're on the bay, which is usually where in the water, it's usually colder than a golf course. Like,
yeah. And plus, that's not stopping. I'll tell you what, Eliana. If it's 40 degrees, if it's 30 degrees, if it's 15 degrees, if I want to play golf, it ain't stopping me that day.
Exactly. That's what I've heard from people that like golf. So yeah, that excuse didn't make sense.
Hey, Dominic, you ever play football in the snow?
No.
Oh, another reason. No, but when I was living in Ohio, well, it was on Thanksgiving. We called it the Turkey Bowl. And we would all get together. We played tackle football. It was one of the most funnest things you could possibly do as a boy. I mean, I was 20, 21 years old. And we would go play tackle football in the freaking snow. And it was great. You would get tackled and then you'd like get buried in the snow. And then it was like a whole thing, mud, snow, whatever. It was like 15 degrees out. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And so going fishing, playing golf in that temperature is not going to stop you. It's just not. It's not. And let alone, if it is going to stop me, I'm going to stay inside, hot chocolate, fireplace, whatever. I'm not going in the freaking ocean. I'll tell you that much. The hell with that.
I don't know. I don't remember how long Scott had been living up north, but it doesn't get really hot in that area.
It gets
Anyway,
cooler. And in that time of year in December, I mean, it's the winter. It's going to get cold.
Yeah.
And so, but you know, to suggest that I'm going to not play golf, I'm going to go fishing instead because it's warmer is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more evidence. He's giving off this story about she's going to go take the dog for a walk, which is nonsense. Peterson had a follow-up interview with Detective Craig Grogan and an investigator from the state's Department of Justice on Christmas Day. And Peterson explained that he had never fished on the San Francisco Bay before, but wanted to test out his boat. I'll tell you what, Ileana, if I was ever going to go fishing, I would not go by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I would take my dad or somebody or my brothers. I would take men with me, you know, mostly because women wouldn't really want to go. My wife could go if she wants to, but I reckon she's probably going to sit that one out. But especially if I'd never done it before, I'm not doing it by myself. But this is his story. He says he troll fished for an hour on the way out to Brooks Island from the marina dock. Peterson suggested Lacey might have been robbed of her jewelry by a transient and then kidnapped, which she wasn't, by the way. The burglary that occurred, none of that was found in their possession. He denied being involved in an affair with anyone. Later that day, Peterson called Detective Brochini to check on that investigation. He asked if the police would be using cadaver dogs to search for Lacey. Brochini explained that they would not because no one assumed Lacey was dead. And he's already talking about cadaver dogs to the police. So red flags all over the place. In the days after Christmas, the Modesto Police Department executed search warrants on the Peterson home and Peterson's warehouse. Police confirmed that there had been no forced entry at the house. None of Lacey's jewelry was missing, other than one pair of diamond earrings, which she was probably already wearing. Traces of Peterson's blood were found on a comforter in the master bedroom, which he explained, that was farming injuries. In sheds in the backyard, police found the covers of Peterson's boat smelling heavily of gasoline, as well as a blue tarp. He had placed a leaking gasoline can on top of that cover, suspected potentially to cover up any scent of Lacey. He was keenly aware that cadaver dogs are going to be used, and so he was acutely aware that they were going to be looking for a scent. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that he was trying to throw off the scent in any way that he could. So in sheds, the backyard, the police found, we talked about the tarp, the boat cover had chunks of concrete in it. Peterson's truck, police found additional spots of Peterson's blood. Peterson explained that he had cut his hand on the truck door. Police found small chunks of cement and a claw hammer with cement powder on it in the truck's bed. And at the warehouse, the police inspected the boat and found a pair of pliers in the middle seat. The pliers had hair clamped in their teeth. Subsequent mitochondrial DNA testing of a hair fragment determined that the hair matched a reference sample from Sharon, which meant that its donor had the same maternal lineage as Sharon. The hair did not match Scott's. So initially I said a single strand of hair. I might have misspoke. They found in these pliers a clump of hair, basically. Now, at trial, they did not connect that to Lacey. They connected it to Sharon. But similar to the Idaho 4, they're just kind of connecting the dots. And it was a new boat. And so it's either going to be Scott's or his wife's, presumably. And it matches Sharon's. So on December 30th, a woman named Amber Frye contacts the police. And I won't go through all of that, but she kind of just tells them their story. She's trying desperately to get a hold of the police because she wants to explain what she knows. She explained that Peterson explained to Frye that he had in fact been married, but had lost his wife, and the upcoming holidays would be his first without her. Which is weird to be talking about something like that to your mistress. So here's the one thing that didn't exist, and we keep paralleling this with Christopher Watts. There was nothing in the form of, this is the first holidays I'm going to be spending without my wife. Now, Christopher's trying to say that he was getting a divorce in the process of being separated, whatever. But this is a bridge a little bit further than that, where Scott is literally saying that I'm a widower, and this is my first holidays that I'm going to be spending without my family. He's saying this to his mistress.
And I believe he said it before Lacey went missing, right?
Yeah.
So he already had
on December 9th.
Make her disappear.
On December 9th is when he told her that. On December 15th, Peterson told Frye that he would be in Europe on a business trip through the rest of the month and much of January. And December 23rd, after Frye asked where she should send him things while he was away, Peterson rented a private mailbox to which Frye could send letters. And he called Frye that day, claiming to be in Maine, duck hunting with his father, and again on Christmas Day, supposedly still from Maine. And after meeting with police, Frye then agrees to cooperate and tape future calls from Peterson on New Year's Eve. Peterson calls Frye from a vigil for Lacey, claiming to be in Paris watching fireworks over the Eiffel Tower in one of the most cringe phone calls you could possibly imagine. He called Frye again on New Year's Day and in the days after, maintaining the fiction that he was in Europe. And on January 3rd, 2003, when police confronted Peterson with a picture of himself and Frye, Peterson denied that it was him in the photo and that he was having an affair. But the jig was up.
Yes.
So, January 6th, at the instigation of police, Frye dropped hints that a friend had learned the truth and would tell her in a matter of hours. I think that's the detective that she had spoke about. In response, Peterson finally admitted to Frye that he was married to a woman named Lacey and had been in Modesto the entire time. The next day, when Frye asked if Peterson had told Lacey about her, Peterson said he had, and that Lacey was fine with his having an affair, said no woman ever.
Especially pregnant, 8 months pregnant and living together.
Hey, Eliana, at what point would your husband ever come to you and say, hey, just so you know, I'm having an affair. You good with it? Are you good? Are we good? What would your response to him be?
Well, this is a running joke between my husband and me that the only time that we will allow each other to do something like that is if that other person is a millionaire and is pretty much paying for everything. So, but I don't think in real life that I will be.
Really? You would do like the Demi Moore thing? Like a, what is it? What is it? Indecent Proposal, that movie. You guys would do that? Seriously?
That's what we joke all the time. Like, he's like, well, if you find somebody else, just make sure that they have a lot of money. And
for $1 million, you may have a night with my wife.
Exactly. Pretty much. And I say the same thing to him. But in real life, I don't think it would really. I would like just thinking, putting myself in Lacey's shoes, especially being 8 months pregnant. What benefit do I get from agreeing to my husband having a an affair? Like,
I mean, I
and
guess you'd have to be like the polyamorous types to
I
allow
guess, but
something like that.
She didn't seem to be that type.
Not at 23.
Um,
Not 8 months pregnant, you know?
That was a complete lie by him. He knew she was not alive to be able to defend herself from that lie. So, I mean, no.
So, Indecent Proposal, Robert Redford was the businessman, the billionaire businessman that offers Woody Harrelson and Demi Moore $1 million for one night with his wife. And they took him up on the offer. And then the rest of the movie involves the fallout from the events. And if there was ever a more perfect billionaire than Robert Redford circa 1993 or whenever that movie came out, that would have been the guy, Robert Redford. I don't know. Who would have been the
Demi
guy?
Moore and Woody Harrelson.
Demi Moore, Woody Harrelson. If I'm getting it wrong, I know people are going to let me know, but I'm pretty sure that it was Woody Harrelson, Demi Moore, Robert Redford was the businessman, and then that was the proposal. And then they made a whole movie about it. It's this very famous, 30-year-old movie now at this point.
But
yeah, it's a difficult watch if you're going to watch it with your husband or wife.
If I'm not mistaken, some people have said that my husband, I think, looks like, yeah. Some people say that he looks like Woody Harrelson, so that's too much of a coincidence. I need to watch that movie now. I just wrote it down. Yep.
Well, Woody Harrelson, how old is your husband?
He's, oh my goodness, 45, I think.
Well, Woody Harrelson in the movie, I'm pretty sure, is like in his 30s.
No, I know Woody is a lot older than him, but they have like a similar, I guess, face structure.
Maybe. I think your husband looks more like
he's 45.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Who?
Look him up. Google him.
What is the name?
Philip Seymour Hoffman. He's dead now, but he strikes me as that type.
Hoffman is the last name, and what was the first name?
Philip Seymour Hoffman, with the exception that isn't your husband? Is your husband bald?
Well,
I don't mean to be talking about your husband. I really don't.
No, by choice, because he has hair, but he doesn't want to go to the, I guess, to the
barbers
because it takes too much time. So he prefers just bust it off. Yeah. I've
seen pictures of him, and if I were to describe him, he looks like Philip Seymour Hoffman, except that Philip Seymour Hoffman has hair. That would be what I would describe him as. Woody Harrelson, I don't know. I'll let you be the judge. You know him better than I.
I do. Let me see. Is this guy?
Dominic is definitely going to do a side-by-side comparison on this one.
Yeah, I don't see. I mean, other than being blonde and I guess like the face shape, I don't really see Philip.
I don't know. I don't have a photographic memory of your husband's face, so I'll let you be the judge of that. All right. So we're getting way off track. So
I know, super way off track.
All right. So in January, after obtaining a warrant, police placed a surveillance camera outside the Peterson home and GPS tracking devices on Peterson's vehicles, including a series of cars and trucks Peterson rented for a few days at a time. Surveillance data from these devices and visual surveillance by the police showed Peterson driving the approximately 90 miles from his home to the Berkeley Marina at least 5 times in January. So maybe it wasn't 25 minutes, but this sounds like more like a 2.5-hour drive. In January, each time using a different vehicle. On January 5th, he drove there in a gray Subaru, spent 5 or 10 minutes and left. On January 6th, he returned to the marina in a red Honda and again spent only a few minutes, which is odd. Extremely odd behavior. On January 9th, Peterson drove there in a white pickup truck. On January 11th, After determining that their cover had been blown, the Modesto Police Department shut down surveillance at the Peterson home. Nonetheless, from tracking data supplied by the automobiles manufacturers, police were able to determine that Peterson returned to the marina on January 26th in Lacey's Land Rover and on January 27th in a rented Dodge Dakota. During the same time period, Peterson began to make various changes to his work and living situations. On January 13th, Peterson gave 30 days notice that he was terminating his warehouse lease, which was not up. There was, I got to speed through this, a $500,000 reward was posted by a private foundation for information leading to Lacey's return. For months, no useful leads turned up. Even when potentially promising sightings were reported, Peterson appears to show little interest. For example, the prosecution presented evidence collected from an authorized wiretap of Peterson's phone that showed he took days to follow up with police about a possible sighting in Washington, though he told others, including his mother, that had followed up with police immediately. Police similarly told a business associate he was waiting near the airport in case he needed to fly up to Washington, though at the time Peterson was not near any airport. He had no concern whatsoever about the investigation that was taking place. They found Connor's body intact. There was tape on his neck, but no associated injuries, which led Dr. Peterson to conclude that the tape was just debris that had become attached to Connor after his death. There was no clothing on the body. Connor still had part of his umbilical cord and meconium in his intestines, which indicated he had died before birth. Based on his size and the softness of his tissue, Dr. Peterson opined that Connor must have remained protected inside Lady's uterus for some time after death. Had he spent a significant period of time exposed in the water, he would have been eaten by marine animals, which kind of begs the question how long he was actually outside before he washed ashore. Lacey had a prenatal checkup on December 23rd. Based on ultrasounds, Connor was 32 to 33 weeks of gestation. Post-mortem measurements of his bone growth allowed Dr. Gregory DeVore to estimate Connor's date of death as falling between December 21 and December 24, with an average of December 23. Both Dr. Esther Tauter, Lacey's gynecologist, who conducted the December 23 checkup, and Dr. Peterson's testified that based on his age and health, Connor would have survived had he been born that day.
Yes, because at 8 months old, you're already, what's the word for it?
Full term, just about 8
Not
months.
full term, because full term it will be the 40 weeks, but there's a term for it where the baby can survive, because even if they have to go into the NICU.
Viable. He's viable for
Viable.
birth.
That's the word, yes, viable. So he was already definitely viable.
37 weeks, I want to say, is considered full term. And I only know that because my daughter was born at Olivia was born 36 weeks and 6 days.
Yes, my baby was 39 weeks, and yeah, it was considered full term as well. So I agree with you. There's like a specific data, and then before that is like viable, and they have the different separations about preterm, like, I don't know, I guess different stages. But yeah, I mean, if she would have gone into labor, that baby would have probably survived. So it's very sad when I heard that part of the evidence.
Yeah.
That he still had his umbilical cord attached and everything.
So on April 12th, the day before Connor's body was found, Peterson bought a car using his mother's name, Jacqueline, as his own, providing a fake driver's license number and paying $3,600 in cash. He had grown a goatee and a mustache and appeared to have dyed his hair. On April 15th, when Sharon called him about the discovery of the as yet unidentified bodies of Connor and Lacey, Peterson did not return her call. Believing Peterson might flee, police arrested him on April 18th, and when arrested, Peterson had nearly $15,000 in cash, foreign currency, 2 driver's licenses, his own and his brother's, a family member's credit card, camping gear, considerable extra clothing, and multiple cell phones. Yeah, he was definitely making a run for the border.
I didn't know about the different type of currency because when I watched the documentary, which I believe this is the documentary that people have said that it was pretty much done with his family's view of the case.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much saying yes, he didn't do it. The explanation that one of his sister gave was that he had taken out some money that he owed or that a brother or something gave him, and that would have made sense, but in a different currency, why?
Yeah, well, I'm going to trust the appellate court's version of
Yes,
events.
exactly. Not the sister.
Yeah, not that documentary. So the prosecution introduced evidence concerning the Petersons' finances. The Petersons' expenses were high in relation to their current income. Trade Corp USA had never been profitable, posting operating losses of $40,000 and $200,000 in consecutive years. The company was not meeting sales goals, and it owed its parent company $190,000. Peterson had signed multiple credit card applications in the company's name, containing misrepresentations as to the company's income. In fall of 2002, Lacey inherited a jewelry and at Peterson's request had some of the items appraised. They were valued at more than $100,000. Computers seized from the Petersons' home and at the warehouse showed emails sent from an account bearing the username SLPete1 discussing the sale of jewelry, and eBay records likewise showed Peterson had posted jewelry items for sale. Lacey also stood to inherit 1/3 of the proceeds from the sale of her grandfather's house, and interest estimated to be worth around $140,000. Lacey's interest would terminate on her death with no right of survivorship to Peterson, but it was unclear whether Peterson was aware of the limitation, which probably not. Most people aren't aware of how that works. The prosecution also submitted additional background concerning Peterson's fishing. Computers seized from the Peterson home and the warehouse showed that someone had conducted searches of classified advertisements for boats on December 7th, the day that Peterson learned he would no longer be able to conceal his marriage from Frye. The same day, Peterson called Bruce Peterson, no relation, about a boat for sale. Peterson inspected the boat the next day and bought it on December 9th. On December 24th, the day Peterson said he was fishing, it was gray, damp, and cold with a bit of wind. Few people were at the Berkeley Marina. When questioned by police, Peterson would not say what he was hoping to catch, but the fishing searches performed from his computer earlier in the month had included searches related to sturgeon and striped bass. Angelo Cunang, a published author on fishing in the San Francisco Bay, who was accepted by the court as an expert fisherman, testified that Brooks Island was the wrong place to seek sturgeon, which congregated in a different part of the bay that time of the year. Sturgeon also preferred live bait to lures, and Peterson's rod was too weak to catch him anyway. So anchoring was essential to reel in the sturgeon. The homemade cement anchor in his boat would have been inadequate. Finally, it was illegal to troll for sturgeon, as Peterson claimed to have done. Peterson's lures and the time of year he was fishing was also wrong for catching striped bass. In other words, if you were really a fisherman, you would know all of that. And Scott was just kind of making it up as he went along.
Yeah.
So the prosecution's theory was as follows. Peterson killed Lacey sometime on the night of December 23rd or morning of December 24th. On the morning of the 24th, Peterson let their dog, Mackenzie, out with his leash to make it appear something had happened while Lacey was walking him. He wrapped Lacey's body in a tarp in the bed of his truck, covered her with the patio umbrellas, drove to the warehouse, and then moved her body into his boat. He drove to the Berkeley Marina, motored out to an area near Brooks Island, and slipped her body attached to homemade concrete weights like the homemade anchor Peterson had made into the bay. Peterson then returned to Modesto, dropped off the boat at the warehouse, put the boat cover out back under a leaky gas blower so that any scent would be obscured. washed his clothes, and proceeded with the ruse that Lacey was missing, hoping her body would never be discovered. So he was not accounting for her torso to be found. Maybe he should have wrapped the cord around her torso as opposed to her limbs, but that's not what happened. The defense argued that the police had not diligently pursued whether a person or persons other than Peterson were more likely responsible. That's, the most obvious defense. The defense presented evidence that a burglary had occurred on the Peterson street. We had kind of talked about how that's kind of nonsense. It also presented evidence that a stranger had gone to several houses on December 23rd asking for money, and one neighbor thought casing houses for burglaries and so might have had something to do with her disappearance. Nothing ever came of that. Testimony was presented that the same neighbor walking with a police officer on Christmas Day to look for the stranger had seen a pair of sandals lying in the road 150 feet from the Petersons' home. The neighbor wondered at the time if they might have any connection to Lacey's disappearance, but the officer just left them there. To support the possibility of a third party's involvement, the defense challenged the prosecutor's theory that Connor died December 23rd or 24th, presenting his own expert who testified based on ultrasounds and other evidence that Connor lived until Christmas, I guess the following day. The defense also sought to challenge other aspects of the prosecution's case to rebut the dog trailing evidence the defense called Ronald Seitz, a second dog handler who also had his dog try to find Lacey's scent at the Berkeley Marine on December 28th. The dog TJ was giving Lacey's slipper as a scent object, but discovered no scent trail. To rebut the inference that Peterson had a financial incentive to kill Lacey, the defense presented a financial expert who testified that Trade Corp USA and the Petersons were both reasonably financially healthy. To portray the prosecution's theory as physically impossible, the defense also sought to introduce a video of demonstration with a weighted 150-pound dummy in a boat on the bay in which a defense firm employee trying to dump the dummy out sank the boat. That was not allowed in evidence for reasons that we had already discussed. So the jury found, obviously, Scott Peterson guilty. In the penalty phase, they recommended that he should get the death penalty. There was an excusal of prospective jurors, which we had talked about, the reasoning for that. And then the court made its own conclusion as to why that was. And then it goes on for pages and pages to discuss their reasoning and all of that. And also inherent in that appeal from 2020 was a request to change venue, which the appellate court found insignificant, so I'm not going to really waste time on that. The last argument was that the admission of dog scent trailing evidence should not have been admitted. However, the fact that they were able to introduce evidence that rebutted the prosecution's interest kind of made that a moot point, and it was left in, and that was that. So that was the 2020 appeal.
Okay.
All right. So let's look at this motion and see what they have to say.
The new one for the
The new one, and I'll try to get to just the meat of it. It's like a 436-page motion. Jesus.
Oh my. And I complain about my emotions.
Yeah. Well, they got like evidence attached and all these kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's declarations attached to it. There's exhibits. All right. There's a table of contents. All right. So on what page could I find the relevant portions, sir? All right. So they have requested items of discovery. So they're asking for evidence regarding the Medina burglary, and what they're going to find is what was recovered, the fact that they took polygraph tests. They spent 13 pages asking or explaining why they need what they're asking for. There's Lieutenant Xavier's Aponte reports. Those are police reports, I'm assuming. The Croton Watch. I'm not sure what that is. On December 25th, 2002, there was a van fire in Airport District. They want discovery related to that. There's discovery requested regarding eyewitnesses who reported seeing Lacey on or after December 24th, 2002. Right now, the prevailing theory is that they must have seen the other two pregnant women that were similar in stage of pregnancy to Lacey at that time. They're requesting eyewitnesses who reported to MPD that they had seen the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, alone and unattended in the Loma Linda neighborhood. They're asking for missing Bates pages from the previous trial back in 2003. They're asking for Gene Ralston's reports, videos, and other data related to Bay searches. They want all videos, reports, and other data related to Bay searches, computer forensics, scent dogs, Modesto Police Department, and Stanislaus County District Attorney office policies in place in 02 to 05. They want any new reports, audio and video recordings. There's the Tracy tip, current evidence, property. So they go on and explain exactly what they want. There was a hearing held. They haven't made a decision on it as of yet. But really what they are getting at is the meat and bones of this is essentially this. And I'll wrap it up from here. There was a van that was found on December 24th, I think they say. Did they say December 24th? It says December 25th, the van fire. Let's go to page 35. So their request is a complete copy of Modesto Police Department case number 02-142687 and Modesto Fire Department concerning the investigation of an incendiary fire of an orange van containing a mattress with apparent bloodstains located in the alley between 612 Thrasher and 607 Empire, less than 1 mile from the Petersons' home in the early morning of December 25th, 2002, the day after Lacey was reported missing. The items requested include but are not limited to, and they just ask for all of the evidence. So this blood stain, what they really want to do is test the DNA of that stain for matches to Lacey. That's what they're looking for. So yeah.
They're fishing to see if by any chance this blood stain on this random car that happens to be just close to the house, it is her blood, then to have a, I guess, reason to show that he was innocent.
So if I'm staying objective, if they find Lacey's blood in the van by some, miracle of chances, do you think that warrants a new trial?
Probably.
I would
Yes.
say yes, because unless that van had any ties to Scott, it flies in the face of the prosecution's version of events as they presented them at trial back in 2003.
So we need to connect that van to him, unless, and that will be another reason to.
They'd
I
have to.
guess
That's what they would have to do. Yeah.
But they didn't provide that information.
But if they don't have that, and they get all this other stuff, it's not anything that wasn't available at the time to them.
It's new exculpatory evidence.
Yeah, and so they've already ruled on a lot of the admissibility of this stuff back in 2020. But so this new evidence, they're really just kind of fishing at this point. They managed to get the death penalty overturned, so victory for them. But if the DNA evidence comes back as it was this, it belonging to Lacey, then sure, give them a new trial, I guess. I don't see how they would not be able to give them a new trial based on evidence, direct evidence that flies in the theory of the prosecution's case that they presented 21 years ago. And so, sure, if I'm the judge, just grant, sure, go test whatever you want to test. And if it comes back, then report your findings back then, and we will decide on the merits of the rest of this stuff. But in terms of, I'll tell you what, the lead detectives on this case, everybody involved in this case, the prosecutors in this case are 100% confident that they got the right guy. reading back some of the evidence and the mountain of evidence, the mountain of circumstantial evidence related to Scott's actions, the way that he acted among other people, the various interviews that he gave, the inconsistencies in his statements, the way that they're able to prove his whereabouts on certain dates in this case, lend itself to it being beyond a reasonable doubt that that effing guy is guilty. And what would it take to change my mind? Well, DNA evidence to the contrary. And so if they find it, then great. Let's see what's out there.
Of course, Scott knows whether he did it or not.
Yeah.
My thought is that if he knows that he did it, like, what does he really believe that he has a chance that magically there's gonna be blood about from Lacey in that van, and then it's gonna help him out? Like, I don't know. I feel like he's just wasting everybody's time.
Well, I guess he's gonna be there for the rest of his life anyway. So why not try what he could try?
I guess, but I don't know.
Is it a waste of time? Yeah, but California allows for it, so why not?
It is like, it's like from I don't know, if it was maybe the van of a family member or something like that, then I could see the possibility. But just some random van, like,
Well, they're grasping at straws. And I think that the general consensus is that this is not going to be successful. This is a monumental waste of time. And I'm almost like disappointed in myself that I've covered it on the chance that there might be something here. But from what I can tell, there's really not a whole lot here to go off. There's not a lot of meat on this bone. And so, you know, I'm really disappointed that the death penalty was overturned in this case. But it is what it is. He's got life without parole, and that gives him all the time in the world to think about all the various ways that he could petition the court for his early release. New trial, reversal of conviction. What does he care? He's not paying for it anyway.
that's true.
The Innocence Project has decided to take up this case, and that's what it is. And it should be noted that the New York Innocence Project has taken great care to distance themselves from the LA portion of their organization. They're not affiliated in any way, and they wanted that to be made clear. And so the LA Innocence Project is taking this up. They're all about trying to get people out based on DNA evidence or scientific evidence that might not have been available at the time. So let them do what they do. And in the event that something comes about from it, then great. It would be the biggest shock of all shocks if they found Lacey's blood in that van. So if they found her blood in that van, yeah, give them a new trial. Let's see what really happened, because that obviously raises a lot of other questions. But until then, the guy could rot for all I care.
Did I mean, because I know the last hearing happened pretty recently, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, on the 12th.
Court give like a follow-up hearing date of when the DNA should be expected to be done, or?
Well, let's see. Let us see. The March 12th hearing. So, according to ABC San Francisco, they say that convicted killer Scott Peterson appeared in San Mateo Superior Court on Tuesday asking for a new trial. And they go through the history. Peterson is now 51 years old, and he looks every bit of 51. He appeared from Mill Creek Prison, 40 miles outside of Sacramento, with a new ponytail. He's got a ponytail. Addressed the court for a few times. The LA Innocence Project filed a 1,500-page brief with exhibits asking for a new trial based on what it claims is new evidence withheld from Peterson's defense team. Paula Mitchell, the group's executive director, told the court the defense was entitled to those at the time of trial. Mr. Peterson has been waiting 20 years to find some of these police reports and audio recordings and video recordings that should have been provided. And then it says, Dave Harris of the Stanislaus County DA's office said the exhibits came to us later than the initial pleadings, so that's been one of the delays for us having to go through each of these particular exhibits. Harris also asked the court to reveal the names of witnesses that have been blackened out in the recent filings. The police have never been provided with an unredacted copy of these reports. We still don't know who those witnesses are. They're anonymous to us. Judge Elizabeth Hill did not hear arguments on Tuesday, just set dates for future filings and hearings. Noted San Mateo County criminal defense attorney Paula Canny was there, telling us they wanted Scott to get convicted more than he wanted to have the truth be told. She acted as a commentator during the murder trial and offered her opinion of the hearings, how the system should work in a perfect world is the police are completely forthright and completely transparent, give everything, and that's not what happened in this case. Neither side in this case would comment before or after Tuesday's hearing. They're due back in court several times, July 15th being the last date on the calendar. So yeah, they're going back to court. And with all that being said, what the defense attorneys are saying is absolutely right. And so get them that information. But I disagree with the fact that law enforcement's been anything but forthcoming in this case. They've given multiple interviews, and they've all been basically open-minded to the possibility that Scott's not the guy. It's just the circumstantial evidence that they have has all pointed directly at Scott and nobody else. And they've checked all that other stuff. And so they're very confident that they got the right guy. You hear them talk about this new evidence in the van. They say, yeah, test it. If it's Lacey, then by all means follow it. But we don't think it is because of what we know. So I will leave that with that. And for everybody else, for all of our over 10,000 loyal listeners, and by the way, Ileana, we're going to have to make good on our 10,000 subscriber promises.
I know. I should then start looking into my purple or pink hair
You
dye.
need to come to the office next week with your hair colored.
Oh, at least next week I only have one hearing on Tuesday, so I guess I can do it anytime after that.
I got to tell you, if I was the judge and I saw you walk into my courtroom with purple hair or pink hair, I could not take you seriously. I might have to take you into chambers and be like, counselor, what the hell with this?
Oh, does it affect how I do my job?
Not at all. Not at all. So I'd probably have to leave it alone at that point. I would just have some friendly questions.
It might be distracting, but
Yeah. At least you don't have to sing a verse from a mariachi song of some random choosing.
there you go.
So we're going to make good on those promises. But for all of you that only tuned in for the Scott Peterson portion, we have concluded that, and we are going to be moving in to our new segment of Family Law After Dark. As soon as I switch the lighting to... All right, folks. So we are going into this advice segment. However, you should know that myself and Ileana are licensed attorneys in the state of California. If you are not residing in the state of California and you're coming to us seeking our advice, or you're turning to this channel looking for some direction without coming physically to us or speaking to an attorney that's in your state, then you are a bona fide lunatic. It's a really bad idea. What we can provide, however, is general direction into maybe perhaps what you have in store leading into your divorce, maybe some of the psychology that goes into these situations, how you should handle it, whether or not maybe it's a good idea to get divorced or separated, or go through the entire, however you guys want to do it. My point is, do not view this as legal advice in any way, shape, or form, unless you are sitting physically in my office or Ileana's office and explaining to me in privacy all of the different variables that are going on with your specific situation. Because short of that, I can't give you a professional opinion on anything. All of this is really just conjecture and speculation. But with that being said, this one person asked for advice. Been married for 12 years. Been together for 16 years. We have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. He has a third child between ours because he went back to an ex because I was hormonal. I was a hormonal 16-year-old having a baby and he wasn't getting laid. Well, that's one way to put it. I did break up with him, but the math doesn't add up between our child and the other child. We officially got back together after our child in 2008 was born, and 3 months later, they had theirs in 2008. I was stupid, and he love-bombed the crap out of me. He does not see this other kid. We had our second kid 2 years later in 2010. Then we got married in 2011. Good choices. So after that, he became distant and all about work and money. I basically raised our kids as a single stay-at-home mom. He only helped out financially. He worked third shift since 2011, so he slept all day. Have you ever worked the graveyard shift, Ileana, ever?
I did a couple of times when I was covering somebody when I used to work at the front desk of a hotel. And
Well,
it pretty much wrecked my body the
yeah,
time that I did.
I did it during undergrad. I worked as a security guard at like this trucking place. I hated it. It was the most boring job I've ever had. But either way, so we had to move into my parents' house around April of 2014 because we were supposed to buy their house, but we were living with my parents and 3 siblings, and I was the only one cleaning up after 10 people. He started an emotional affair with his best friend. He said things were too stressful for him, and he needed an out. So he ended things with me while he was trying to figure out how to get to another state to be with her. But he needed to be physical, so he talked me into a sexual relationship. I was 22, and he was the first and only guy I ever loved. I would have done anything for him. I eventually asked for a divorce, and all of a sudden, he couldn't live without me. We moved into our own house in November of 2014, and things seemed good, but I was still very alone in the marriage and parenting. In 2016, he asked if we could try swinging. I thought I had to keep him happy. It made me sick to think of being with anyone else. It was awful and even more mentally damaging than I could have ever imagined. He emotionally, physically, and any other way possible cheated on me. He took liberties without asking, never communicated, and often guilt-tripped me or gaslit me. I hate to admit this, but I let it happen until 2018. And then I put an end to it because my mental health could not handle the manipulation and hurt anymore. I lost 2 incredible friends because him sleeping with them was more important than me not being alone. Later that year, I got a job first time and I loved it. I was the happiest I'd ever been. But he made me quit in 2019 because he started a new job and it was more important. Then COVID happened, and something broke inside of me. In 2021, I had to leave because it got so bad that I was thinking bad thoughts. I asked him for 1 year to work on myself and figure out what I wanted. He gave me 3 months and texted me every single day about how he missed me and loved me. We never went on dates because he didn't see the point because we were already married, but all of a sudden, we needed them. I still don't understand that. What am I missing in that paragraph? Is
This is a toxic relationship, and I don't know what she's asking.
Is he the one that was asking to go on the dates? He gave me 3 months, text me every single day. We never went on dates. He didn't see the point because we're already married, but all of a sudden we needed them. I still don't understand. Okay. When I came back in January 22, he finally went to first shift. He was finally building a relationship with our kids for the first time. He started to help me with the chores and dinner for the first time, and we finally went on our first family trip. I finally had the husband I wanted, In January of 23, I was questioning my identity. I told him I might be trans. Jesus.
Oh, make it more interesting.
I don't know. I just don't feel like I'm whom I'm supposed to be. A few days later, he said he has been thinking and he thinks he's trans too.
Oh, okay.
I'm starting to think this is a put on.
I know.
I was baffled. He said we could do this journey together. That didn't feel right to me. All of a sudden, I was sharing clothes and makeup with my husband. I had a surgery in February and I had an injury in March. The entire time I was recovering, both times I had to emotionally take care of her. I bought her clothes, makeup, jewelry, you name it. I was the most supportive spouse. I gave her everything. I made her a bra to give her a chest. I bought her a wig, heels, stockings. I held her through her body dysmorphia, through every breakdown. I supported her when we told the boys. I supported her when we told her transphobic dad. I supported her through social transitioning. After all this, while ignoring my own mental turmoil, I believe in May I officially started to grieve my husband, but at the same time I was trying to make Katie happy. I got diagnosed with BPD, bipolar disorder. That was rough but eye-opening. I started sleeping in our garage because I just couldn't look at her. I couldn't tell you why, though. I just couldn't be in the same bed as her. And in September, I left again. I was so confused. I asked for a divorce. I just never expected what came next. I checked myself in a mental health hospital in October. While I was in there, I thought I got a handle on things, and I realized I was grieving my husband, and it was rough. We came up with the plan for me to go back and stay with her so I could be around my kids. I was not expecting her to tell me that she was now had a girlfriend. This was on the drive home from the mental hospital. That night, we made an agreement to not let the kids meet her until they were dating 6 months. The next few weeks, I'm not very proud of. Had many episodes, and I shoved her when she got in my face. I kept having to stay with my parents because long periods of exposure to her was messing with my head. The last time I went out to their house, it was a Sunday. I was supposed to go back to her house on Thursday. She knew I wouldn't be there on Monday. All right. So what is her question? I'm not getting help or support
Other than venting.
or nothing from my spouse, and I cannot find any legal help without filing by myself, and I don't understand half of what I'm reading. I have nowhere else to go. I live in Michigan. Yeah, which is a no-fault state. So, you want to tackle that one, Eliana?
I don't understand what she's asking.
Does she want to get divorced?
Yes, I guess you should, because this obviously is not working out, but other than that, everything that she just mentioned has absolutely nothing to do with or has any effect on the divorce.
No-fault state, they treat that very much like California. Nobody cares about any of that. She wants to be trans. You want to be trans. You guys want to be swingers. Or he wanted to be one and you didn't want to be one. And now her name is Rachel now, and you're grieving your husband. Can't help you with any of that. You want to get a divorce, then do it. You're going to have to figure out, of course, the custody and visitation aspect of that, but your children are older now. The fact that he had one without you prior back in 2008 really doesn't matter anymore. That child is 16 and long since gone. Those children are going to be fine. You want to get divorced now, then do it. All this other nonsense that you're dealing with, and whatever you're going. Look, you guys are going through things that are unique to both of you.
Right.
The husband that you married is been gone for a long time. And you put up with it for all of these years. So you don't get to all of a sudden call yourself the martyr and you're just this saint because you put up with all of this and you sacrificed yourself. Yeah, you did all of those things. Good for you. And what has it got you? A broken marriage. Congratulations for all of that. I have nothing really to say. You want to get divorced? Get divorced. And hopefully it works out. And honestly, you probably should. That sounds like a nightmare for anybody to have to go through. And you should have left him way back when you were, 16 years old. So this is the first time you're going to be a grown person without having to deal with that person in your life. And I'd imagine the fact that he's trans and now identifies as something else makes it that much more easier. There's no husband to go back to. So go find yourself a husband if you want to be with a man or a woman, or go experience life. The children are going to be fine. You're not asking any questions about assets, which is good. So that's, you know what? I'm not really going to touch that one any further than that. That's what it is. Do you got anything to tell that person?
No, I mean,
Best of luck to you. That's what I had to say. All right, so this next person is a man. I'm married, and my wife wants a divorce, and I have been fighting for my marriage, and things have gotten worse for me. And I don't know what steps to take. Me and my wife separated, but we're living together with her mom. Sounds like a nightmare of a scenario. We've lived with her for a while. My wife's attitude changed out of nowhere, it seemed. We have a year-old child, and to me, she's still my everything, and that's never going to change, sir. And I know some people are going to say I should let her go, but I feel like if I do, I'm going to be missing a whole lot with my son. And I feel like my son is going to be affected. But we separated, and I was living with my wife and her mom on my days off, and living with my brother when I had to work. And recently we all had a big blowout. And they kicked me out, leaving me stranded. They took the car keys and everything that was worth anything. My wife took my name off her phone plan. We had been together for years. We have a Jeep that I have been paying, but it's not in my name. And they kicked me out when it was my turn to have my son, and it was agreed that I'd have him so she can work. But we had a disagreement, and I didn't get to see him and finish my time with him. What I'm asking is, what can I do? My wife plans on lying for her mom. Plans on taking sole custody and the car. And pretty much everything. All I have out of this is I'm living with my brother with no car to get anywhere. I lost my job due to depression of our separation, as I was a correctional officer, and my marriage and managing to take the care of inmates was too difficult on me mentally, so I resigned. But all my money has been sent to her even after our separation, and I didn't save me a penny. I sent it all to her. Is there anything I should be doing? And when I said she plans on lying for her mom, and one night me and my wife had a disagreement, and she always brings her mom to take control of the situation, and I had enough and told her to stick to her business elsewhere, and she went over to me and grabbed my shirt while pulling it and made the neck stretch out. And then another time, the last time I lived with them, they kicked me out, so I go to take keys to drive to my brother's, but they keep me inside the house until I give them the key. So my wife went out back door with my son, took the spare key and the Jeep. As her mom was holding the door shut in the front, they tried taking my only form of communication, which is my iPad. My question is, she won't let me use the car, and it's under her name, but I've paid on it until I quit my job, and I'm not trying to take it away from her. I'm trying to use it to get places. Are there ways to fight for her to let me use it, or can I get her to pay me some money back, or have her help me co-sign for a car, which, what the hell? This guy lives in California. All right, what do you got to say to this guy, Elian? I got a lot to say. It's not going to be nice.
I know, there's just so much going on. Starters. I mean, I understand the worst is hard, but I hate it when they say that they had to quit their job because they're going through a divorce. Most of the time, court's gonna be like, I don't care. You
Courts
find
don't
yourself-
care. Yeah. The world is a harsh and nasty place. What do you want to hug? Get your ass back to work is what they're going to tell you. Yeah. So
And in the beginning, that he didn't want to finish the relationship just because he wanted to spend time with the show. Like, that's just not. I mean, no. I mean, he needs to accept the fact that they're separating, they're going their own ways, and he needs to find some sort of, I guess, counsel, not, well, yeah, legal advice, I guess, so that he can understand what he can expect out of the divorce process, because it seems to me that he is completely unaware of what he can get or not get or from this process. Like, for example, at the end where he says that get her to co-sign on a new car.
Why?
No,
Yeah. Why would you do
that's-
that? No. He needs to cut ties. The whole idea about
No.
living with a stepmom was a stupid idea. When he
Exactly,
figured
yes.
out that she wanted to be with him way back when, he should have left back then.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's just he needs counseling, like just to accept what he's going through and the process. He needs to go back and get a job so that he can pay for his stuff and not depend on her for transportation or anything like that. And he needs legal advice so that he at least understand what he needs to expect from the process.
Well, here's the legal advice. Listen, buddy. Well, this isn't legal advice, but he needs to go sit with an attorney. But just generally speaking, the moment that he figured out that his wife, that they were separated, he should have just found his own way. Instead, he chooses to live with mother-in-law. Obviously, that's going to stack the deck against him. Now he's just kind of the inconvenience that is living there. The only attachment that they have to him is the fact that he's father to the child. And look, it would be great if your wife didn't want a separation and you guys wanted to stay together and live happily ever after, but she doesn't.
Exactly.
And at some point, you need to pull your head out of your ass and get yourself together, because nobody's going to take sympathy for the fact that you were being so noble as to try to hold this together. She doesn't want it. And so you need to grow up and sack up and find something else to do. Another place to live. Go find yourself, I don't know, a girlfriend. Go file for a divorce and start going through the mindset that you're not going to be with this woman anymore. Hey, this lady has decided that your child is going to grow up with a broken home. You can't do anything to fix it. You can't force her to be with you. So you need to pull your head out of your ass and figure it out. And if you want to feel sorry for yourself, you can do that on your own time, because nobody's going to be there to give you a hug. That's just the reality of it. If you were a female, if you're a man, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to say, oh, you poor, poor thing. Or they might say that, but they're not going to give you anything for it. What do you want? You want some Girl Scout cookies? Because,
Those are good.
I mean, well, they're pretty good. But look, buddy, your identity is attached to this marriage, but that is not what you're going to be anymore. And the more that you ruminate over it, the more that you want to live in denial. Nobody's giving you brownie points for sticking around. They clearly don't want you there. And so what do? You file for a divorce and you start filling out your income and expense declaration, figuring out your assets. They don't get to unilaterally decide who gets to be in and out of your child's house. But I'll tell you what they can do is set you up for a domestic violence situation. Like when you said mother-in-law was grabbing you by the shirt. How do you think that that's going to come out in court, buddy? It's going to come out that you were being this drunken idiot and threatening everybody, and in self-defense, mother-in-law trying to shield your son and her daughter from your deranged behavior, defended them and put herself in peril as a result of that. And what that's going to land you is a restraining order against you, granted for a period of 5 years, that will create a presumption on Family Code Section 3044 that says you should never have custody or visitation of your child that's not supervised unless you overcome this presumption, which then she will get full custody of the child. And that's how it's going to be. And you put yourself in that predicament because you chose to live there. So get yourself out of there as quickly as you can. Only communicate through them through writing. Have no physical interactions with them that aren't recorded, because very clearly to me, it looks to me like they have a clear objective, which is to take full custody of their child and leave you with what they're willing to give you. And you're walking right into their trap. If you don't do something right now, your future is going to be supervised visits once or twice a month for a couple of hours at a time until you figure out how to overcome a 3044 presumption, which will require you to take anger management classes, parenting classes that you probably don't need, a myriad of other different things, so that the court is sufficiently satisfied that you're no longer a danger to your child and that you could have unsupervised visitation with your child. But until then, You're going to pay a professional monitor, something like $50 an hour, to spend a couple of hours every other weekend with your child on a Sunday at some random park bench that nobody wants to be at. Good luck with that. That is your future. Or you could pull your head out of your ass right now and start taking action and start putting things in gear that protects your rights as a father, because if you don't, your child is going to grow up knowing that you abandoned him because your ex-wife, and start thinking of her as your ex-wife, is going to tell him that, and you ain't going to be around to correct the record. And that's all I really got to say to that young man. What do you think, Eliana? Am I being too harsh?
No, I don't think so. And I think this is the type of person that needs somebody to be harsh with him so that he can finally understand and accept what he's going through. Because if you are too soft on him, he's just going to continue with that same, I guess, behavior for me.
He needs to know that his ex-wife has probably already had sex with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other men. Whether or not that's true doesn't matter. He just needs to start thinking of it that way and react accordingly. Your wife is gone. She don't want you no more. You've been rejected. And now she's trying to reject you as a father. And you as a man, as a person, as anybody, if you wish to be a part of your child's life, can't let it happen. The finances will take care of themselves. It doesn't matter whose name is on what. But do not go about co-signing or asking her to co-sign for anything. Jesus.
No. He's probably going to say no anyway, but still.
I don't know, man. I just know that the way it's going, it's just not looking. The finances are the least of your problems, buddy. You got a lot bigger problems if you don't do something right now. So we'll leave him with that. We got time for one more. For one more. Let's see. All right. So I need some advice. In June, I caught my wife emotionally cheating and she asked for a slow separation. We were in the middle.
What is that?
we were in the middle of an adoption process. And I ended up conceding to sticking with it. All right.
Oh, poor
Through
baby.
the months, I fought hard to attempt to keep the marriage together while she was secretly trying to see others. I lied to our state adoption worker, stating we were still together, and we basically acted happy. She put a time limit on me with the stipulation of having her fall in love with me again by the adoption time or we were officially done. I don't know. Eliana, if you were going about the business of trying to see other people, at what point do you think that you would fall back in love with the person you were cheating on with?
That's almost not possible. I mean, I know it has happened to people, but
I'm not sure that it has. Honestly, it's not
I mean,
the
they
way.
will have to cut off the other relationship and I guess go to therapy or something like that. But while still seeing the other person, that's not gonna happen.
So she wants to go basically sow her wild oats in the hopes that, well, I don't know. She's obviously looking for something better, and if she can't find something better, he's the backup plan?
I guess.
I don't know. Seems like a raw deal for him, but that's a stupid stipulation. Either way. So I did everything I could. I changed my many facets of myself. I sold our home, bought her dream home, paid off our debts, all the while with the hope that that we would make it. Through many downs, depression, anxiety, weight loss, and hopelessness, nothing happened and nothing worked. She remained steadfast that we were not together, yet made no effort to actually leave or separate with the children. Well, it's because it's convenient to be there, I guess. So fast forward to now I am done. Now I want out, and she is seeing someone officially, and so am I. Well, good for you. Our finances are separate, and through much fighting, I had agreed to split the house bill 65-35 since I make more money so she can keep the home. I no longer sleep at the house. I still in the morning to take the kids to school, work. He still in the morning takes the kids to school, work remote in the house, and then pick the kids up. I put the kids to bed most days, grocery shop, manage the finances together, but I don't really live in the home. I want out, cannot keep the house individually, and she makes significantly less, but she refuses to agree to sell the home. She claims I gave her dream home and I am taking it from the kids and her, yet the dream and intent was clearly to save the marriage. She wants me to wait 6 months so she can more than double her income through multi-level marketing or some miracle promotion while I work forced overtime to make ends meet. I'm even willing to get a second job to have enough income to find a second place so I can have the kids with me. Since I do most of the kid work, I feel stuck. I live in California. What can I do? Well, I'll give you first dibs on that one, Eliana.
Oh my goodness. I mean, he needs to start the process of divorce, and I don't care about what or why or for what they bought the house. It just needs to be divided, like it or not.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They need to establish a date of separation. That's going to be the most difficult part of it. So, arguably, the date of separation was when he caught her emotionally cheating, but maybe not. She said they were separated. Those are triable issues. Why does that matter? Because it puts an end date on the marriage and defines the length of the marriage. He didn't say how long they've been married for, or maybe I missed it.
I don't remember you mentioning it.
I don't think he did. So that's going to affect, clearly she's going to be asking for alimony. He makes more. He didn't say how much more, but alimony is going to be a thing. Child support is going to be a thing. Child custody and visitation is probably going to be close to 50-50. He's doing most of the kids stuff is what he says. So he must have a job that allows him the pliability and schedule to make that happen. So if he has to pay child support at all, it's not going to be a hugely large amount because he's going to be actively involved, which is a good thing. The assets, it really doesn't matter who, if you guys can't, if one of the other can't afford to buy the other out, then the house is going to get sold. That's going to be the final order of the judge. And so the reasons why the house were bought doesn't matter. It's clearly community property. So if it's community property, you guys are going to sell it and split the proceeds. Simple. If she wants to keep it, then she could buy you out. And if she can't do that, well, then tough S.
Mm-hmm.
As far as everything else, all of the other assets are going to be split down the middle. Yeah, this just seems like his biggest mistake, your biggest mistake was sitting over here thinking that, oh, we're definitely going to get separated and she's just going to work on herself. Buddy, she was over there looking for something better. She was tired of you. And that's just how it is. Hey, the reality is in marriage, it just, most of the time, it doesn't work out the way that you hoped.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you got married when you were super young. Especially if you got married and you weren't fully developed, or one of you was not ready to be married. What I've noticed about these marriages and people coming to us, and really just in our own separate practices, is everybody wants it to be acknowledged how miserable they are in the marriage, both man and woman. If I were to have this woman in my office, she would be telling me about what a terrible marriage it is and how much she's sacrificed and tried with this guy, and he's not doing whatever. And so now she's miserable and she wants out, and she would have her own story to tell. And she would want me to acknowledge all of the perils that she's going through in this marriage. And this guy is no different. He wants to be the hero because he's the one trying to keep it together, and he bought her this house or whatever. Fine. But the reality of it is, in California, nobody cares whose fault it is. You guys are people. It didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
She's not a terrible mom. You're not a terrible dad. And, the kids are going to be hopefully very lucky to have two parents that are deeply invested in their future. And they'll adjust. They'll figure it out. The money part of it is easy. Now, the longer that you guys this 65-35 thing that you talked about in terms of bills doesn't really matter a whole lot unless we're going to do Epstein and Watts credits. And those are, you know, a perilous journey that most family law attorneys in California don't like to litigate because it's stupid. It's a lot easier to just look, we'll just cut it 50-50. Otherwise, we're going to nickel and dime. And really what Epstein and Watts credits are worth is not really all that significant when it comes to the total amount of equity. So, you know, I mean, you can litigate that if you want to. Maybe it's worth something, probably not. But hey, just cut your losses, man. File for a divorce, get yourself a good California attorney, get yourself a good, probably free consult, and figure out what your rights are, figure out what assets are going to go where. But likely it's going to be this. You guys are going to sell and split the house. Who cares what the purposes of it were for? Nobody cares that she had an affair. Nobody cares what the reasons were behind it. It's just we need to figure out now how you guys are going to exist going beyond and forward. And that's really it. That's it. What else you got to say to this guy, Eliana?
Well, not only to this guy, but I think the public in general, because this is something that I see a lot in practice, is that whenever there's a house involved and there's children, there's always this excuse that they want the house to be for the children.
Yeah.
Or leave it to the children, or that was the purpose when they bought it, to eventually leave it to them. And I can tell you that most of the time, the children can care less.
They really can't.
About, like me right now, my mom is one of those that she's like, oh, I want to leave you guys, me and my brother, with the house and this and that. And me and my brother could care less. Like I mean, if we get the house, we're probably just gonna sell it and get the money. So might as well sell it now, enjoy that money.
Yeah.
Maybe put it in a trust account or something like that. But the house per se, like the physical structure, most children could care less. This is more of a, I guess, this notion that marriages have, that they should leave their children with something. I don't know.
Well, sometimes like we'll work it out to where you want the kids to live in the house while you're going to school because it's close to whatever, the high school, whatever, fine. You can do that. And sometimes you can even do that in lieu of child support. You can work that out if you really wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But you also don't have to agree to that. If you don't want to worry about it, then just sell the friggin' thing. That's the easiest thing to do, and that's all the judge is going to say. There's not really a winning case in that. You want to keep it, you can't afford to do it. So what's it to you, buddy? So yeah, this is a pretty straightforward divorce. It sucks that he's going through this. It sucks that you wanted it to work and it's not. It sucks that she had an affair, but hey, life moves on. Such is the nature of divorce and your illusions of trying. I mean, luckily he's not under this illusion anymore. It's not going to work out. So look, it doesn't matter. She doesn't want to sell it. The judge is going to make her when push comes to shove. And you might not even have to get that far. Chances are if you get an attorney, she's going to get an attorney and her attorney is going to tell her that. And then you guys are going to come to an agreement and you won't even have to go in front of the judge because it's a waste of time and money. What are we fighting for? And so, yeah, that's all I really have to say to this gentleman. And that's going to wrap up our segment of Family Law After Dark. For those of you that spent the entire 2.5 hours with us, thank you so much for listening all the way from start to finish. I really appreciate you. Let me know what you think in the comments about the advice that we gave to these folks. Let me know in the comments about what you think about the chances of Scott Peterson's appeal being granted based on everything that we said, or just your thoughts in general. We'd love to hear them. And with all of that, I guess we will see you guys next week when we cover, what are we going to cover, Eliana?
I don't know. I mean,
Vander Ark is on deck.
Yes, and the other case that I've been following closely is the Ruby Frankie.
Oh, I've been getting a lot of requests for that one as well. It's either
But at
gonna
the same time, like, there's not much to discuss. They pled guilty, and like the evidence is out there. Yes, it's gruesome and it's a very sad case, but I don't think there's much legally to discuss.
they've been sentenced. I mean, I think the shocking part of it is that they were sentenced to basically 60 years, but under Utah sentencing guidelines, it's going to be like a max of 15, and they could be out as early as 4.
Yeah, they were cuckoo, especially Judy.
Yeah, we might talk about the case. We've covered it before. Well, in a miniature segment. You never know. We'll see. You guys let me know what you want us to cover in the comments, and we will be happy to do that. But until then, it's been a wild morning with all of you. We will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.